Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, Theresa May is back at work now, having taken a nice Swiss holiday. Tomorrow is an important one. The Cabinet will sit around the table discussing Brexit. Nick Watt, more importantly, is also back from his holiday. Great to have you back, Nick. So it feels a little bit like things settling in. What have we learned today about...
Well, we've learnt today that Theresa May is saying no to a second referendum, no to an early general election after the Brexit vote, but yes to beginning the process early next year of taking Britain out of the EU by triggering Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, but without a vote in Parliament, and assuming that she wins a legal challenge against that. Now, had we been paying attention when Theresa May launched her leadership contest back in the early summer, we would not have been surprised, because she said it would be wrong to add to the uncertainty by holding an election, and she said Brexit will mean Brexit. And as one ally said, she needs to trigger it early next year so she can have taken Britain out of the EU by 2019, and she can go into the general election in 2020 and say to the British people, you voted to leave, I delivered it. Can I have a reward at the general election, please?
OK, so that we learned a few bits today, but if we'd paid attention, we wouldn't have learned them. We would have known them. What about tomorrow, this big thing tomorrow?
So it's the Cabinet away day at Chequers. It will begin with the formal Cabinet, with the Cabinet Secretary round the table and the usual stuff there, and then the officials will be gently and politely shown the door, and the real business in the political Cabinet will begin, and the three Brexiteers, David Davis, Liam Fox and Boris Johnson, will do presentations, how are things going. Now, there's been the odd sign of tension between those three.
A bit of wrestling or something.
Indeed, and Theresa May not amused by that, and the significant thing is she needs them to get their ducks in a row so that there is an agreed UK position by the time she triggers Article 50 early in the new year.
Are you any clearer about what that position might be than the rest of us?
Well, essentially, the grand bargain is that Britain, to coin a phrase, needs to take back control of immigration, and if you're doing that, then you are going to limit your access to the single market. And it's interesting, I was talking to one senior Whitehall source today who was saying the key thing is Britain has to be a rule maker, not a rule taker. And this person was saying, I think that means we're going to have limited access to the single market, and interestingly, perhaps no passporting. This is the process that allows us to sell our financial services around the EU. This person is saying the process that we might move towards is equivalence. We, the UK, set the rules and the regulations, and then we say they are equivalent to the EU. Big problems there, though, because who arbitrates? Probably the European Commission. But on the positive side, Theresa May has been struck on her visits round 5 European capitals how fellow EU leaders are shell-shocked by the UK result. They don't want things to worsen, and they're sounding possibly flexible, saying perhaps they accept you would have free movement of workers, not people. Maybe that's encouraging for her.
Nick, thank you. Well, as the new political term is almost upon us, we've invited along a panel of friendly experts to offer some helpful advice to Theresa May. We've asked each of you to tell us what her priority should be. There's been a lot going on. Here with us, Anne McElvoy from The Economist, Polly Toynbee from The Guardian, and Fraser Nelson, editor of The Spectator. Anne, if she has to pick one priority, what should it be at this point?
I think a big priority for Theresa May is people, particularly outside London, outside the urban centres, who maybe voted for Brexit, but they're not die-hard Eurosceptics. She just feels that they're people who've become a bit divorced from what goes on at Westminster. They feel the system doesn't work very well for them. She sees them as quite small C, rational people, not the dispossessed. Often a lot of Brexit is blamed on people protesting or being dispossessed. She knows that a lot of people in due sobriety and after due consideration voted for this, and that it is a symbol, if you like, of this dislocation. Right. She wants to put that back together and rebuild small C conservatism.
OK, but also particularly outside London. But of course, the previous government, Osborne-Cameron, had a big idea there, didn't they? Northern powerhouse, and we've been a bit all over the place when
whether this is happening or not. That sounds to her too top-down, too many kind of posh banker friends of George Osborne doing the right thing for Manchester. Very nice for Manchester and Leeds. I think it did leave a lot of holes because there was a lot of the country in between thinking, hang on, what about us? I think what we'll see with her is perhaps less of that kind of big headlining, that sort of grand idea, and more, as she will see it, as an outreach to lots of places places who can feel they have a stake. How she's going to deliver that will be difficult and interesting.
OK. All right, that's one. Fraser, come on, what do you think her priority should be?
Well, she has to explain basically who she is and what her agenda is. People have known her as the Home Secretary for ages, but she wasn't one who would tell you what her vision of politics was. How does it differ from David Cameron's? So what direction is she going to take the country in? It's not that long ago we were watching television debates of three leaders, which seemed completely ridiculous. Now we've got somebody entirely different. And she hasn't really had a leadership contest to explain this. I mean, right now she should really be going up and down the country trying to explain what she intends to do for
She's been
Britain.
very quiet, actually. I mean, partly because she's been on holiday, which is perfectly reasonable, but
Yeah.
she hasn't exactly been putting herself about, has she?
She hasn't, but even her own cabinet don't quite know what her agenda is, and some of them don't even know why they were appointed. Now, she needs to get her agenda across to them first, and then to the rest of the country. There is no such thing as Mayism right now. I think she needs to work out what it's going to be, and then tell her colleagues, and then tell the rest of us.
So she needs a Mayism. Polly.
Well, the big discussion starts tomorrow. Her honeymoon is over. She's confronted with a cabinet which is riven over the big issue of Brexit. Even the three Brexiteers in charge of it don't really agree and don't really know what it is they want. She said Brexit means Brexit. That is meaningless. Nobody knows what it means.
It's a delightfully helpful get-out clause.
She has to immediately say what she means by it. And in my view, that should be supporting Philip Hammond and saying we have to stay in the single market. And she has to set the parameters and not allow them to all run away with a great squabble amongst themselves. She has to establish her authority and say, this is what I mean by Brexit. Interested to hear your views. We'll see as many as we can accommodate, but she has to say what Brexit is. It's a nightmare. I don't think any Prime Minister in living memory has stepped into such an appalling situation.
She has more hard Brexiters in her party than her majority is big, basically, doesn't she? So it's not that easy to steer your way through.
She does, but she has a huge majority in the House of Commons who are Remainers, and an even bigger one in the House of Lords, and it will come back to the Commons, come what may. For one thing, the 1972 European Communities Act has to be repealed. Every element of this will end up being discussed in Parliament. It may drive the rest of the country to desperation with its complexity.
OK, let's let the others come in on this. Come on, Andy.
Well, it is an act of political levitation, as Polly reflects. I mean, she is also a Remainer, but she was such a quiet Remainer. I think where her positioning, as Fraser was interesting, saying no such thing as Mayism. Well, we know it's not Maoism, right? But apart from that, she has a blank sheet on which to write. She's been very good at not boxing herself in other on issues as Home Secretary, where she's already on the record. And even so there, on Bill of Rights and things, she seems to have created some space for herself. My worry about Theresa May would be, does she really know, has she got the team, has she got really the plan in order quickly to put into that space? I think she's been very clever at getting where she got to. She's come through as a Remainer in charge of what has to be a Brexit cabinet. It's interesting that, Polly says it's unmanageable, but she is chairing these committees. She knows how to run the organisational chart of government. But the question is the substance.
Fraser, can she, if she was so minded, basically say, we're going to stay in the single market and have a minimal change on free movement? Or does she have to say free movement is ended?
I think she has to. The way that the referendum campaign was fought was there was basically an unwritten understanding that free movement was the problem. The idea that you couldn't control the ever-rising EU migration turned out to be one of the central issues of the referendum campaign. Now, technically, she could do a Norway. When she says Brexit means Brexit, what she means is we're not going to do a Norway. We're not going to be in the EU and yet effectively and pretend we're out of it technically. That does actually mean coming out.
So we are drifting towards what Nick was describing, which is probably no passporting for what is our biggest export industry.
Absolutely. I think that was fairly widely discussed during the campaign.
Something her Chancellor, Philip Hammond, is worried about.
Absolutely. He said it very clearly. Yes. And I think we've got to remember, too, that she has other huge problems on her plate. The NHS is on its knees. People voted Brexit, big promised, entirely mendacious, £350 million a week for the NHS. Social care is in a state of absolute collapse. Where is the money going to come from? We don't yet know what her economic policies are. Is she willing to borrow? Is she willing to let the deficit slip?
Would you call an election if you were her now, Fraser?
Not right now. It would be an act of, I think, sadism on the Labour Party and the country to do it now. But the thing is, if she's going to be so much different from David Cameron, and by the way, it looks as if she is so far, then I think she really has to. If her agenda is significantly different to the one the country voted for last year, then she ought to do one.
And you're thinking what, when? Sort of like spring next year? Or...
Yes, spring or summer next year. Hopefully the Labour Party might resemble an opposition by then.
She says, I'm not going to do it. I mean, is it just the best thing after the Gordon Brown experience, just to say you're not going to do it until you actually do it?
I don't see why she needs to, really. I think she's in such a commanding position. The Labour Party is in such a state of absolutely shambolic collapse. I can't see why she doesn't simply plough her course, do what she wants to do. She's pretty much mistress of all she surveys.
She's only going to do it when she has a deal that she can put, a reliable deal that she can put.
You think she has to
people.
Brexit, be clear about the Brexit before the election?
I think otherwise the whole election campaign becomes Referendum 2. You know, the horror story continues, 2.0. What's in it for her? She's not, as Polly reflects, she's not under massive pressure from the Labour Party for the foreseeable future. So I think that she can largely control the time. It may be that 2020 is a long way away, but she does know that she has got control because nobody else, as it turned out, in her party could do it better.
We'll leave it there. Fraser, Anne, Polly, thank you all very much.
I've been